I'm Theodora Scarrato, Executive Director with Environmental Health Trust, and I am just thrilled to be here today with Rodney Palmer from Collingwood, Ontario. Rodney has worked for 20 years as a journalist in Canada and abroad. He was the CTV News foreign correspondent and bureau chief in India, China, and the Middle East. He was nominated for a Gemini Award in 2002 for Best Foreign News Reportage and was awarded the Canadian Radio and Television News Directors Award for Best News Reporting for his work in Israel and the West Bank. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for talking about this today, Theodora. It's a privilege.
Well, I am honored to have you do for all of us a presentation on your efforts regarding wireless in schools, going back into some of the history in Canada, and then up till today in terms of schools that are hardwired, and basically the story of how you got involved and what you know.
Well, it's interesting because the story happened actually after I left journalism. My family got very sick in China from the pollution, and we had to leave. And basically, we couldn't live in major cities anymore, which is at the level I was operating as a journalist. That was it. I mean, they don't send you to Bermuda, right? They send you to New Delhi. And so we took a break, and then I started a business first time during that break, and it kind of took off. So we just went with it, and we got to live in a quiet little town, and it's really idyllic. I mean, I live at the bottom of ski hills. I'm sitting in the office that I built for myself. I can see my ski hills out the window. It was a dream come true for me until my kids started getting kind of sick at school. And it was a weird sickness. My son was coming home with red hot ears, color and temperature touch, and rangy, like he hadn't eaten all day. And he had. And then my daughter, who's about 5 years younger, he was in about grade 4, she was in junior kindergarten. And she was floppy. We called her floppy baby, which is a symptom of a newborn, right? Not a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old. And this kid's a dynamo to this day, super energetic. For example, today she's 15. She went paintballing with her school yesterday and took a shot in the head, and probably has a concussion, and just wanted to go to school and carry on. She's a tough kid. And I was picking her up and putting her in her car seat, and she was sound asleep after school. All of these symptoms were going away on the weekend. And because we had been through not once, but twice environmental illnesses, once when I worked for Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and they were in about 26 buildings in downtown Toronto, and they consolidated into a single brand new whiz-bang, spanking new build, 10-story building right block of downtown Toronto. And we moved in, and all the carpet glue and this classic sick building syndrome was going on. So I had been through that, how to identify a chronic illness that makes no sense, the causative factor being, in my case, the glues and the bad air system in the CBC building, and something like 600 of the first 900 people who moved into the CBC were sick. And it was interesting to me at the time because the only real precedence for identifying a sick building was the Environmental Protection Agency in the US, which is a building full of scientists. And they went, hey, we renovated the building, and now 90% of us can't work anymore. And then another one with Health Canada building in a small town called London, Ontario. And same thing. They renovated over the weekend so that they wouldn't waste anybody's work time. They all came back on Monday. By Tuesday, they had 80% of them sick. One of them got taken away in an ambulance on the Monday. And again, a bunch of scientists saying, what changed, right? What's the new variable? And it was the toxic paints and glues and all of that stuff. So we started thinking about that. Could that be at the school? And no, there was none of that. Mold is another thing that sort of systemic in a building and can affect you, airborne mold. It was a poured cement building like a hospital. There was no real mold in the place. So my wife, in her illness onset, became electrically sensitive. And it was just, we didn't know anybody else was. We just started noticing she can't put her head near something that's plugged in. She couldn't be in the car with my cell phone on. She got a very particular symptom that she described as a compression on her head. And we're in the kindergarten class having tea served by the 4-year-olds with grandmother visiting, and she gets this headache. And she says, do you have your cell phone on? I'm getting that headache. And I said, it's not even with me. It's in the car. And she went around the table and asked everyone if anybody had a cell phone on, and no one did. So Wi-Fi was a kind of a new thing. It was like the techno nerds were doing it in 2005, 6. It hadn't permeated yet, but she wondered if that was the same thing. So we asked the principal who was sitting with us, does the school have Wi-Fi? And she says, yes, it was just installed a little while ago, and look above you and there's the transmitter. Isn't it cool? So she moved out of there and her symptoms immediately went away. And we thought, oh, geez, I wonder if this is what's bugging the kids. So then we shifted, and we had been through like the whole removing foods to figure out if it's allergies and all of that, like a lot of time trying to figure out what was making my son's ears red hot. And then one day when he was on the computer a little longer than he should have been, typical parents of young children, like the computer's your babysitter. And we noticed one ear like shiny red. And we went, bingo, he's in front of a computer. Not that we had Wi-Fi on, just the radiation from the computer, and it was enough. He was sensitive. And if now, with the benefit of hindsight, when he was born, I was the CTV News correspondent in Israel. I didn't know anything about cell phone harm, no idea. You remember the Y2K bug fiasco? So I was in Israel, and everybody was preparing for the lights to go out across the planet. And they sent me a satellite phone, which looks like a modern day laptop. And I had no idea how to operate this thing, keep it charged up just in case we have to broadcast without electricity. And of course, none of that happened. But my Australian broadcasting friend said, that thing will neuter you. That's hardcore dangerous, right? And I went, oh, interesting, right? That was the only comment I'd heard in my whole life about these things. So we realized later that my son was a fussy baby. He had to be held all the time. I got one of those slings that you put on around and you put the baby in it. And I learned how to, cook behind my back so I didn't burn him. My cell phone was in my pocket. His head was right here. That went on for 2 years. So the guy's sensitive. So we saw this happening. And then we started to think, well, my daughter's symptoms were weakness, lethargy, and a skin rash. And my son's symptoms were irritability and red ears. So how many doctors do you have to go? That's it, the ear doctor, probably the psychiatrist, the dermatologist, the neurologist. There's just too many doctors involved in that. When we knew through getting our family better that environmental medicine, or which, there's many academies now, functional medicine. At the time, it was the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, of which I believe Deborah Davis is a member. I've certainly seen her lecture there a number of times. They were the ones that were kind of pointing out the notion of the total load, the multiple toxic effect. The last one is the straw that broke the camel's back, that kind of concept. So we asked the other parents, how are your kids doing? Oh, and they all would say, oh, I've been going to the eye doctor. I've been going to the ear, nose, and throat doctor. And we said, well, we found out they put the Wi-Fi in the school, and these are the symptoms. And these are the ones we've been able to research. And as journalists, we're able to go right to the top, like you read the medical studies, talk to the professors who are looking at it, call the researchers personally. We didn't take any third-hand information because that's what we were trained to do our whole life. My wife is also a highly respected journalist. She had done documentaries that won her the Amnesty International Prize in Journalism for a documentary film one year. She's worked for PBS Frontline. So we kind of knew how to find the truth. And they said that the symptoms are many, and it depends on the person, right? So maybe what it does is causes attacks the immune system, or makes you fight it, or whatever you're susceptible to. The notion of epigenetics, the environment can trigger the problem that you have laying there wait to happen. But the bottom line was probably a third of the mothers said, wow, you've just explained the last 18 months of my life. And they kept saying 18 months. And then we found out the Wi-Fi had been put in 18 months ago. So bingo, we had our adjutant. We as journalists thought we should try to get some attention for this. So we went through the process first of telling the principal, and then the superintendents came down, and nothing was happening. We got a real sense that they're trying to shut up the noisy couple, right? So we did some news releases. We started a group called the Simcoe County. That's the county we're in. So the school district is all the Simcoe County. We called it the Simcoe County Safe School Committee. We reached out to parents in other schools. We found out that this was happening in virtually every school in the county, that they had a multitude of kids with neurological symptoms that were unexplainable and undiagnosable. So this was the problem. So we called, we put out these news releases, and the easiest way to get a journalist's attention is to tell them an absolutely fantastic story that's true and let them verify it themselves. And that's what happened. So this is one of the stories on the Canadian press that parents were pulling their kids out of school, having to homeschool them. The kids just couldn't tolerate it anymore. And this sort of in around, when is this, 2010? So around this time, the news swept across the country, and there were documentary films being made at our school by the top national television shows in Canada. It was front page news. We generated basically a national discussion about it because, of course, I'd left journalism, so I didn't have a platform. And so I just told other journalists, hey, this is going on. You think it's a story? Come and look at it and decide for yourself. We found out that the Wi-Fi in schools is way more powerful than the Wi-Fi in your home, because people started asking, well, we got Wi-Fi in our home and nobody's got a problem. But one of the parents whose kid was having a chronic headache, in grade 4, only at school, never on the weekends, started again Monday morning. He was an IT specialist, and he has an alarm company, and they go house to house wiring, and he says all the wireless. So wireless was coming on. And he was telling me, oh my gosh, this is a tsunami where, speakers are going to be wireless and fridges are going to be wireless and stuff that I couldn't imagine at the time. And now here we are. But he pointed out that when he looked into, he looked in the model of what they put in, and he said, this is not a $100 Wi-Fi from your local Best Buy. These are $1,000 systems designed to run 30 computers at once, downloading video in high data situation. They were in a kindergarten class with 4-year-olds with no computers. They were entirely unnecessary. So that's the thing about the Wi-Fi in schools. It's not the Wi-Fi in your house, and you have no ability to turn it off. And the kids are being exposed from the moment they walk in the door. So this was the concern we had. And we thought, boy, it would be nice if you could just take it out. So the kids that were experiencing the irregularities included children, 7 kids in my kid's little elementary school wearing heart monitors like this little boy. So he had to wear this thing to school. And there were 7 other kids simultaneously wearing them. And we even had parents come in who were trying to poo-poo it. I think they were probably sent by the school board. And they said, oh, erratic tachycardia, this rapid racing heartbeat is no big deal. My kid has it too. And we thought, okay, well, let's just add them to the list. Now we have 8 kids at our school wearing these heart monitors, because the reason they're heart monitors is because they're confounding their doctors, right? There are ways to diagnose pediatric heart issues, and they weren't working. They weren't figuring it out. And so they wanted to test them over time. So when we looked into it a little further, in 2008, there was a famous story. This is just after the Wi-Fi was put in. A 10-year-old girl died in the gym class in our county. She dropped dead. And 2009, another boy dropped in the school, and a teacher called the police, and the police came and defibrillated him back to life. And then he had a defibrillator or a pacemaker put in, installed forever. He's got it now. The next year, 2010, a 15-year-old boy was out running in gym class, dropped, and he had was revived again, like brought back to life, and he had a device put in his heart. And so I investigated this with, I was going to a lot of medical conferences for my business at this time. So I started talking to some of the doctors. There's a doctor named Stephen Sinatra who sort of developed the notion of metabolic cardiology, which is how, the nutrients and the vitamins support the heart. So cardiology was not that advanced at the time, and he helped to advance it. And so I asked him, what would make these kids, drop dead in the school? Could it be just the Wi-Fi? And he says, probably not. But you've got a kid who maybe has an undiagnosed heart condition, who's too young to have had it present as a problem. And then he said, maybe they didn't have breakfast that day. And maybe they had to exert themselves earlier in the day. All of these kids were in gym class. And then he said, what you've got is what's called a perfect storm, that a little kid is going to succumb. And you don't know who it's going to happen to until it happens. So that was the best explanation we saw. And any of these kids wearing these heart monitors because of their sudden tachycardia, in my view, were candidates to be the next kid who had sudden cardiac arrest, is what it is the heart just stops like that. So when we reached out across the county, there were many, many more. And there were kids with tachycardia only at school. There were kids, there was one little girl who was diagnosed when she was very, very young with musical heart, which is it changes beats over time. And again, she was getting these symptoms only at school. So this little guy in this picture had a very serious event of tachycardia. One morning, 9 a.m., his mom brought him into school. He had too many things. He had his laptop, this and that. I think he was he was in a special ed class maybe. And they took him to the room where he gets, some, special teaching, for the first half hour of the day. And his mom, as soon as he opened the laptop, his mom said his face went white and he couldn't speak. She says, "What's wrong?" And he couldn't talk. And she said through his shirt, she could see his little heart pounding as fast as a hummingbird's wings, she said. And it was moving the shirt. So she just took him out of school. And as soon as he went out, he went, "Oh, that feels better." So this is the kind of stuff that was going on. And I was thinking, how many kids are we going to have to kill? We've pointed out, like, I get that they didn't know this was happening, but now that it's happening, do something about it. So I decided to go to the school board and show them a video. I interviewed a half a dozen kids and a half a dozen parents, and I'd like to play it for you now because most significantly, think about it when you're watching this. This was at a school board meeting with all the trustees and all the staff, the full-on political entity that is a school board. And it was up, I was a delegate, and there was half a dozen parents from our school speaking. And what we were asking for was the right to pay to hardwire the school for the total of 7 computers in a school of 250 kids that were used, that needed the Wi-Fi. And the superintendent responsible for putting the Wi-Fi in swiveled his chair and put his back to the video. This is a 15-foot square video, and he's paid to be there to watch it. And he turned his back to it so he could later say, "I didn't see it." This is the video. So go ahead.
I'm speechless. You're telling me he turned around?
He spun around. This is a thing they do. Like, I have a friend who's a politician, and he didn't like the mayor. Remember Mayor Rob Ford, crack-smoking mayor of Toronto? Big story a few years ago. When he first got elected, a friend of mine was on city council, and I noticed at the inauguration, he turned his back to it. So it's a thing politicians do. But this guy wasn't a politician. This guy was a $180,000 paid superintendent for the school board who had several meetings with myself and my wife. He had been at the school talking to the principal. He was aware of all of it. And when we were about to show the elected officials of the school board, he turned his back to it. So this is what he turned his back to.
Hi, I'm Austin Lamont, and I'm 14 years old. I go to Mountain View School. I've been suffering weird headaches and dizziness and displacement. Like, it feels like my head is like there's a lot of pressure in my head, and it's like repulsing like this. And I just feel like displaced, and then when I'm not there, nothing happens. So, and like, I get really like weak. And like it's hard to hold a pencil too, and I can't think straight.
Starting this year at Mountain View, I've been getting a lot of headaches, and it's been making me really dizzy, and like it feels like I can't concentrate, and you feel like you're not really there. It's hard to explain.
The thing that concerned us was that she always got better when she got home, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. We got our eyes checked and found out that wasn't it, and actually had everything checked and found out that wasn't it. And she's still, to this day, when she goes to class, probably about 4 out of the 5 days that she's there, she's coming home with a headache. And I mean significant headache where she has to take Tylenol. or Advil?
My children, they are students at Mountain View School, and in the last couple years I've noticed that my children have had headaches, which concerns me because I don't know many children that do get headaches.
My name is Gigi. Mountain View parents have 2 kids at Mountain View. One is in grade 6, one is SK. My concerns are Georgia used to complain of headaches while in school. So then I decided, okay, take the next step, go to the doctor. So we went and saw the doctor. She interviewed Georgia and asked, if these headaches occurred while in school, at home, and the outcome was they were only occurring while she was at school. They weren't occurring on the weekends. And now being in a portable, nothing, no headaches. So, what do you say about that? Strange.
As a parent, I wonder, how does it compare to a cell phone tower, for example? We've read these studies that show that living within 300 or 400 meters of a cell phone tower can increase your chance of all kinds of ailments, headaches, dizziness, even cancer and leukemia. What if you measured that? And then what about at our school? Could you measure what the microwaves are at our school where the kids are sitting every day? Even if you measured outside of the windows, right where the kids are sitting in a kindergarten class, could you detect microwaves?
Since I found out about the Wi-Fi and some of the symptoms, it makes me think that we don't know enough, and that maybe we should be cautious, and before it's completely proven safe, I would really choose to hardwire all of our computers, which does the same job that the Wi-Fi does.
About 2 years ago, my son started getting some strange sensations, and it was usually at nighttime. It would last about 10 or 15 minutes.
I had my eyes, everything looked big, and when my mom talked in bed, everything sounded really, really loud.
His bedroom was right over where we kept our computer, I realized later, but he would get really strange sensations at bedtime, and he would call it the weird brain thing. And I'd ask him to describe it to me, and he would describe it as the windows and doors were changing shape, and my voice was getting louder and softer. So his perceptions were quite distorted, and I was worried, and I suspected it was the computer. One day I called the phone company, and I just said I wanted to switch to cable, and it was just a matter of changing the modem. He's never had that weird brain thing again, ever.
The computer was right under me, so it was pretty obvious.
So Theodora, that is that's the video that the school board superintendent in charge decided was not really worth looking at. I'm
speechless.
Yeah. Austin's now a father of 2, by the way. These kids, this is 10 years ago.
I was thinking about that, how many people on the call, may have been around, have learned about this just last year or just this year. But yeah. I remember being introduced to your work. It's now been a decade ago, and here we are.
The school board, instead of, doing what we asked, which was real simple, handful of parents wanting to hardwire the school and pay for it, they decided to send in somebody to measure the microwave radiation in the school and didn't tell us. Now, at this time, there was a parent council at the school, which is a legislated body in every school in Canada, or in Ontario anyway, in our province, has to have a parent council. And the parent council was entirely focused on this issue. Every meeting, there was nothing else we were talking about. So this guy comes in, the principal at the time, who's now been promoted to superintendent because Mr. Swivelchair has retired, and they put the principal that did the following in. He oversaw the radiation expert come in the school, and they printed a report of what they found. So this is the report. This is what they did. They measured the power densities, Mountain View Elementary School. And here, the first one. So they've got 12 locations, okay? Location number 1 room 104A. This is the room that little boy that we showed you earlier with the heart monitor on had the cardiac event. Same room. So whereas safety code 6 equals 1 in this report, safety code 6 is the safety code that is human threshold limits set by the government for all kinds of radiation, including X-rays. So it includes the cellular phone signals and Wi-Fi. And we've all talked about this, and I'm sure everybody watching this knows that these safety codes are 40 years out of date. They specifically require skin temperature to elevate by 1 degree Celsius to determine that you've got too much radiation. So when I read that, I thought, well, my kids' ears are way over that. My kids' ears are probably 10 degrees Celsius higher, or maybe 5, certainly fever level, just located in the ears. So for the purpose of this study, they set safety code 6 absolute limit for human tolerance, which we dispute, at 1. So we go down here where they've got a laptop open and it says in contact display bottom. So this is roughly where a kid would put their fingers, and it's at 1.342. So that's 34% higher than the limit the government says will start to cook a human.
Whoa.
In the room where the kid had the cardiac event.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm a manufacturer and the products I make adhere to electrical safety standards, and I'm very much well-versed in testing anything. What you would do if you got that, you would immediately try to repeat it to see if it was anomalous, because it seems freakishly high. And these other ones down here are at 6%, 10% of safety code 6, which are already high enough to cause biological harm in all the literature. But they got 34% higher microwave radiation than safety code 6 says is allowed for humans to experience. And they didn't tell us. I found out when a reporter went to a school board meeting and this was presented as totally safe. We tested Mountain View School and found it was totally safe. So the reporter phoned me up and asked me to comment on it because I was the loudmouth talking about it at the time. And I said, I haven't seen it. I didn't know about it. Nobody told me about it. So they sent it to me and I immediately recognized this. And because I'm not a scientist, I sent it to a number of scientists to say, am I reading this correctly? And they say, absolutely. So we brought this back to the school at the parent council, and we had a vote on something or other. And the principal, who's now the superintendent, arranged for this vote to be skewed in some really obvious way to the point where the parents revolted. And I said, and then he wanted to talk about having a barbecue to raise money for more technology in the school. And I said, look, are you not paying attention here? If there's a death in the school, all of these warnings have been talked about to the point where you, the principal, could be liable if you do nothing, or in this case,
right,
conceal. So I said, why don't we raise money to buy stamps? And we'll print a letter to every parent. Or first of all, I said, we'll send a letter home in the backpacks to the kids saying, this has happened, not allowed. So I said, well, let's buy some stamps and send a letter to everyone in our town. There's only 10,000 people here. What's it going to cost? And we'll say, if your child attends Mountain View School, you should be aware that on this date, the school board measured microwave radiation 34% higher than allowed by the government of Canada for human safety. That's a fact. That happened. And he said, you will not be allowed to do that. And I asked him, what's he going to do? Is he going to make me sit in the principal's office? Like, what do I have to do to point out that you've exposed these kids to an illegal amount of microwave radiation after they reported that they were having symptoms, after your vice principal witnessed, because he was the teacher in the class when this kid had this event, and you're doing nothing. And we have laws to protect children in Canada from abuse. And the law goes like this. If you even suspect that a child is being abused and you don't report it to the police, you are criminally liable and could be imprisoned. He didn't like that analogy, but that's fact. And that's what he was doing. So I couldn't put my kids in the school anymore. And I became one of the first, my wife and I became one of the first people to pull our kids out of school. And we taught from home, because what can you do? When you got this data, your kids are symptomatic, it goes against every instinct of a human being to put their kids in harm's way. Proven, known harm's way.
Right.
So we started researching a little more, and we found science dating back to 1969, which at the time was 40-year-old science, that showed health implications of microwave radiation, which included heart rate variability irregularities. 40-year-old science. So it's something was going wrong here. And I met a professor that's fairly well known in this field now worldwide, Dr. Magda Havas, from Peterborough, Trent University in Ontario, Canada. And Magda had a great pedigree as far as I was concerned. She was one of the first scientific researchers in the early 70s who figured out acid rain. And she went to the high Arctic and measured to places where plants couldn't live because there's sulfuric vents that spew sulfur into the air and create a little water cycle locally of sulfuric acid rain. And it killed everything. So she measured the pH level of that rain and compared it to the rain in places like Toronto and places in southern and northern Ontario, our province, where lakes were dying at the time, and said that this is very similar. So what we're headed for is a death of flora and fauna and sickness of species unless we do something. And she stuck with that for about 15 years until they finally got a bilateral legislation between the US and Canada. I believe it was signed by Prime Minister Mulroney and President Reagan, although it might have been first Bush, called the Clean Air Act, I believe it was. And it was an international legislation that, because we found out because of the air current at the time, the pollution from Ohio was killing Canadian lakes and the pollution from Ontario was killing the US lakes. So unless we were in on it together, we had no solution. So I was pretty impressed by that, because as a young reporter, I reported on that exact thing. I reported on the legislation. I reported on the interest groups called the Acid Rain Coalition. And I never met Magda during that period, but it turned out she was the scientific advisor to all of that. So I understood her pedigree. So she was working on this issue at the time and guided me to a lot of the science, including those 40-year-old studies. So she started testing the effects of simple Wi-Fi from a home device on human blood. And on the left, you see what's called the red blood cells, which are, each cell is free and floating, and some of them are a little bit together. And then after 10 minutes with the Wi-Fi on, this is what happens to her blood under the same slide, is it clumps. It's called rouleau formation. And clumping blood is not oxygenating the body. So this is the basic biomolecular science that suggests if this is going on in a little kid's body, get enough oxygen. What happens if they start running in gym class? What happens if they start running in gym class and they've got an undiagnosed heart condition? What happens if they start running in gym class with an undiagnosed heart condition and they forgot to have breakfast that day? That's why, maybe, connecting the dots, these kids had suffered cardiac arrests. Then we looked into a little further and we found that in the 15 years previous, which is kind of the onset of cell phones, mid-90s onward, it was a sharp spike in sudden deaths in athletes. And I attended other medical conferences where they, certain doctors from the International Academy of Oral Dentistry were pointing out that some of these athletes had been tested, the cadavers of the dead ones, and they were very high in mercury in the heart. And at the time, they were connecting it to the mercury in the teeth from the fillings to the heart. Since then, doctors have pointed out that mercury is one of the most highly conductive metals, and at room temperature, or certainly body temperature, it's in liquid form, and it's conductive. So if that's concentrating in your heart, it's conductive, and you're a 18-year-old basketball player in the south side of Chicago, and you're 2 hours late for dinner because you're loving the game, these are the kids that were dying. And this had gone up sharply, commensurate with the onset of cell phones. So this was like a bigger part of the background that was going on. And then in 2013, and this is not, we're not making this up, like this is from the National Stroke Association, which published it in Neurology, which will be the preeminent journal for neurologists, medical neurologists, that the rise in young people in strokes, which is typically an age-related issue, went up 44% between 2003 and 2013. So something's going on. And when something like this happens across a population, it's always environmental. That could be food, air, water, but it's environmental. Or in this case, potentially a new agent like wireless radiation, which is permeating our lives and our schools. We found out that about 8 years before we had stumbled onto this, a group of scientists in Germany had sent an appeal saying, we have a dramatic rise in chronic illnesses among the patients. This is learning, concentration, behavioral disorders, heart rhythm disorders, cancer, epilepsy. And they believed that it needed further investigation, and they believed at the time that it had to do with the onset of wireless radiation. So this is the early warning signals. But this is the kind of stuff that we went, okay, well, it's not just us, a couple of journalists, it's scientists, and you just had to look hard to find it. So eventually, I got invited to HESA, which is the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Health. And the way the government works in Canada is they have committees. They have the Finance Committee, they'll have the Security Committee, they'll have the Health Committee. So this is the Health Committee. And standing committee means the committee is constantly there. And when there's a new parliament, new members are elected and other ones are elected out, that they reform it. And it's formed based on the ratio of represented in parliament. So the government of the day, at that time, the Conservatives, would have formed the majority of people on the panel. And then the other two major parties at the time would have formed a fewer number. So I was invited to come and speak. And I knew that I was going to be flanked with scientists and Health Canada top directors, and they were going to bring people in who would flash their credentials. So I told them, look, I'm not a scientist, but I was a journalist, and they all would have known CTV News and CBC News and Globe and Mail, the places I worked. I said, I'm going to tell you what I observed in my school. And I told them the story I just told you. And the head of the radiation protection branch, who had no schooling in radiation at the time, she was, her background was in pharmacy. She came up with some new language. She said, there is no consistent evidence that Wi-Fi causes any harm to people. So I pointed out that that's great. She's an expert in science. I'm an expert in the English language, and I've worked as an editor. And if I was editing that for clarity, I would say, let's just take out that superficial phrase, no consistent, and see if the sentence still works. There is evidence that Wi-Fi causes human health effects. But she said she chose to say no consistent evidence was her testimony at this very official hearing. So I asked, by whose standard did she overlay that it has to be consistent? Because if you wouldn't even survive, cigarettes cause cancer, because only 35% of the people who smoke a pack a day for 30 years will have lung cancer. It's high enough to say, don't smoke, you might get lung cancer. But it's not consistent that everyone will get cancer. So by whose measure do we require 100% consistent evidence in order to pull that thing out of the school? Because what we were doing is we were taking an agent, by her testimony and my editing, there was evidence that it caused humans, and we were forcing children to be exposed to it every minute in the school. And we pointed out that, and at the time, the school board was saying, well, we go by Health Canada and we go by the World Health Organization. Until in 2011, the World Health Organization added microwave radiation from cellular devices to their list of possible carcinogens. So the school board stopped paying attention and said, we only go by Health Canada now. So clearly they weren't interested in the evidence. So they would say, you know, there's other things on that list like coffee. And I said, that's very interesting. And they said, the car exhaust is on there. You know, we all exposed. And I said, so you can show me the school where you're forcibly exposing the kindergarten class to 6 hours of car exhaust and lead, because that's your excuse. So none of it made any sense. There is evidence that they are intentionally harming every child. So fast forward a few years, and my son's in high school. Now, he doesn't go to the public school system. We go to a private school that has no Wi-Fi, and I'll get to that in a minute and tell people how they can do it if they want to try. But his friends who had gone up through the system and stayed in school were experiencing anxiety in the classroom to the point where they'd have to leave the classroom. Now, rapid racing heart is what happens when you're stressed. It's a natural response to stress. The number kicking in from a brain message saying fight or flight. And when my friend's son went down to the guidance office, there was a lineup of kids. And the guidance counselor said, I'm not going to get to you for a couple of weeks. Another friend who was actually in a private school, that in most private schools, they're not going to take Wi-Fi out because the marketing tool is we got the fastest damn Wi-Fi you can get. You know, that's going to be their marketing tool. So this kid was getting constant headaches and went down to the principal's office, and they said, oh, there's a bowl of aspirin and a bowl of Tylenol. So the mother said, why do you have a bowl of single-use Tylenol, single-use aspirin? They said, well, to give the kids a choice. And we thought, well, have you not thought about why your school is full of people with headaches? And it's a common symptom, low-level common symptom. And people can simply, if you're getting headaches at any time of the day, shut your cell phone off, they'll go away. So the Standing Committee on Health deliberated, and they met 4 times. And this is, I believe, the recommendations after the 4th one. And they were all ignored, by the way, but this is an official document from the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health. And my favorite, there's 2 of them. One of them is recommendation number 4. The Canadian Medical Association and the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons and the College of Family Physicians of Canada, these are the doctors, okay, the groups and their professional associations. They're updating the guidelines and continuing education materials regarding diagnosis and treatment of electromagnetic hypersensitivity to ensure they're based on the latest scientific evidence and reflect the symptoms of affected Canadians. So if they did implement that, what that would have triggered would be education and continuing medical education for doctors, family physicians, the guy down the corner, gives you your booster shot, checks you for as you're growing up, all that stuff, that they would have known that if a child is presenting with unexplainable and unsourceable cause of certain symptoms, that the standard of practice would be to recommend to the parents, first of all, inquire, do you use wireless? Of course, the answer is yes. Can you turn it off? Is there wireless in the school? Can you keep the kid home for a few days and measure the results and see if the symptoms abate? So because they ignored that recommendation, and the current government, Pierre, his daddy, Justin Trudeau, has ignored this. So if they had done it, and doctors could have done it, parents would have known what to do to abate their kids' symptoms. Instead, all they have at their disposal is pharmacological remediation. Give them a pill. If it doesn't work, give them another pill. Doesn't work, give them 2 pills. Doesn't work, maybe it's in their head. The standard of practice in Canada for medical doctors is if they consistently don't respond to whatever medicine you're giving, you need to refer them to a psychiatrist. And anybody who's been chronically ill for a long time, that's usually the last straw for them. And they go and find something, they find their own way because they know they're not crazy and they know their symptoms are real. So that's been ignored. But what a great recommendation. Tell the doctors about the updated science. We're not saying what to tell them. We're telling them to read the science, educate the doctors, especially pediatricians, but that's not being done. The other great one is recommendation 7, that the government of Canada establish a reporting system for potential adverse reactions. Now, this is the one that was met with the most severe objection. So what happens in the mechanism for the health committee is the health committee comes up with its recommendations, and then each political party gets to have their own addendum at the back where they have their own comments. And the Conservative Party, which at the time, I don't begrudge them because at the time they were ruling, and we believe that Health Canada is profoundly conflicted with the telecom industry, the pharmacological industry, and the pesticide industry. And I'm not saying anything that's going to shock anybody. So the thing was clearly written by a professional protecting the telecom industry. It wasn't written by anybody in the Conservative Party of Canada, I don't think, when I read it. But it basically said to recommendation 7, we should not do this. We should not have a reporting system in Canada for potential adverse reactions to wireless radiation. To whose advantage is to not have this? And then they went even further to say, if this does go through, we should not analyze the data, but put it in a holding place. In other words, ignore it. If you're going to do it, then ignore it. Shocking. Didn't make it.
There's no data. There's no, then it doesn't exist. You can just erase it. We have that in the United States. We actually have a way that you can file with the Food and Drug Administration injury from a device which emits radiation. But when we queried them on that, as to where was this information going, it goes nowhere. You file it, no one's looking at it. It must exist in an email or somewhere, but no one is looking at that data at all. And most people aren't even aware that that's something that they can do.
Yes, that's the problem. So the argument was, well, we already have an adverse event reporting system, but most people aren't aware of it. If you developed one for this emerging technology, and the most interesting thing about the Safety Code 6 document that they were relying on is right in the preamble, it says, in the case of emerging technology, this report may be irrelevant. And we had emerging technology, and it is irrelevant. So that went nowhere, even though a lot of effort went behind it. Many people got involved. Magda Havas testified. There were scientists came in from the United States, from Canada. Frank Clegg, the former president of Microsoft Canada for 15 years, he was testifying about his own industry and what's going on, and that they don't test, they don't guarantee safety, they just do it, and they leave it to the government. And what's happened is they're all delegating responsibility to the government, and they're absolving themselves of liability. And they say, oh, we don't say this is safe. The government says where to be safe to, and we meet that threshold. So we knew that there was alternatives to wireless. The whole internet worked for a decade and a half without it, right? So you can use fiber optics, you can use Ethernet cable. There are power line adapters. There's all kinds of stuff that can be used. So what we did after a year of homeschooling, and my kids are both in gifted classes, and they're smarter than us, and even in grade 4 you got to give them a teacher. So this property is across the street from our house, and it's a private school, and look how beautiful that setting is. And so I walked across the street and I said to the headmaster, do you have Wi-Fi in your school? And she said, I don't know. We just built the school. It's all hardwired. There might be a couple Wi-Fi transmitters. I said, if you take them out, I'll bring my kids here. And little did I know, because they just built this multi-million-dollar school, they were desperate for money. And so as long as you pay for the hardwiring, you can come. And I thought, here we go, we're in. So we did it. And that school is so interesting now, because every year the kindergarten fills up, not in August, but late September, when parents come and they say, my new baby in kindergarten is experiencing anxiety. Do you remember being anxious about kindergarten, Theodora, or extremely excited about it? Can't wait to get there. Look at this fun thing. Next stage of my life. My elder brother and sister went there before me. It's amazing. Anxiety was their rapid racing hearts. There were kids who wouldn't go into the school. Mom and dad would drop them off and they go, no, they run out and they run back. Even if they went in, they run out again, instinctively, fight or flight. They bring them into our school. Hey, your school's awesome. We wouldn't even tell them because it's probably too much to wrap their head around. If you like the school, leave your kid here. Fine. So this school is now probably the most decorated school in science and math in our province, the biggest, most populated province in Ontario and in Canada. Wow. Every year, half of the team from the entire county, so the county has 50,000 students, this school has about 150. There's a team that goes to the science fair. There's a competition within the school and that goes to the region, and the region selects 7 kids to go to the Canada-wide science fair. And it's a big privilege. It's a big event. They go away for a week. It's set in a university dorm. Some of these kids are in grade 7. It's so cool. They have all kinds of, it's a big budget thing. They have all kinds of scientists who come and talk to them. They tour the universities, the museums. It's an amazing privilege, but you have to qualify to get there. This school sends half the team out of that 50,000 pool every year. Yesterday, they wrote what's called the Waterloo Math Contest. Waterloo University is a top school for computer science and mathematics in North America. BlackBerry, which is a company that's a product that's manufactured by a company called Research in Motion, is in that city, Waterloo, Ontario, and a big employer, and that's their training ground. Waterloo is like, it's up there with Stanford for training in computer science.
It goes through 12th grade.
What's that?
It goes through 12th grade.
This school goes through 12th grade. But what I'm telling you is the university holds mathematical competitions for high school students.
Yeah.
And our school wins the zone almost every year, meaning the top 5 marks at any single school are put up. And this school, so even though we don't have Wi-Fi, we somehow beat the pants off all the other schools academically. And so it's clearly not, I'm not saying it's because of the Wi-Fi, but I'm telling you the Wi-Fi is not necessary to be scientifically advanced. And the kids coming out of science fair in the last several years have turned their 12th grade science project into businesses. One of them started a business called Hear Me Cheer during COVID. You may have heard about it. It was talked about on TSN, ESPN Sports. He developed an app where you go into, let's say they get a client, and their first client was Major League Soccer out of New York, and that client will broadcast their game live through their website, and anyone logs on for free, turns on their microphone, and can cheer the game. So the stadium, and if there's 10,000 people, you hear 10,000 voices cheering on the game. It's called Hear Me Cheer. So this is a kid in first-year engineering school, University of Toronto, and he's developed apps through going to this school you're looking at. And another kid developed a system where I think ironically he might use a wireless technology, but I think it's infrared sensor detections for a hospital. So you can do complete monitoring of all the vitals through a device that's attached in the ceiling above the patient, and they can read it from the front desk. And he's now got a staff of 10, and he's in his 3rd year at university in engineering. So, these kids go on to win the top awards, like the Canadian equivalent of the Rhodes Scholar, where they get their whole ride paid for. And they probably graduate 10 kids a year, and they're nailing all of these things. And they clearly don't need Wi-Fi to be at the top of their game. And look at the setting, how beautiful it is, right? Every classroom looks out on this wetland and gets southern exposure to the sun. There's a lot of attention made to Portland cement floors and good air handling system. And you can see the 2nd story where they look out there. And it's just a magical place to send your kids to school. Now, here's what a classroom without Wi-Fi looks like. You see there's a computer on most of the desks there. You get a little closer look, you see a couple wires going over to the wall. We've put them, now this is a video I took to show you. So here's the laptop. A lot of laptops don't even have LAN ports, so there's a USB connector to a LAN port. LAN port goes down there, up the wall, plugs in, and they're on this desk. So this is how the kids get their computer connection. The teachers love it because they know who's connected to the internet and who isn't. because in a public school system, you just don't know who's paying attention and who's, Facebooking, So this is one of the classrooms. This was multiple solutions depending on the classroom, but this classroom has got banks of electrical connections and LAN ports on each wall. And then the kids just line up, and if they're not on this particular desk table, then they have all these port access. It's simple. That's what they did. This classroom, this is the science lab. You can see all the sinks and all this, the human biology chart in the background. And you see those white posts? This is the solution we did in this school, in this class.
I see.
So this is across the hall. So these white posts are line drops that come down from the ceiling. And here's a little, I think this might be a video. Hang on a second. I'll show you. This might be a little shaky. But so these posts are just in the middle of the room. And there's the computer line and the electrical cable. They come down the post. And this is standard stuff you buy at the electrical store. And at the bottom of the post, you've got 4 LAN ports for the kids.
Right.
And on the other side, you've got the electrical connection for their laptop. And there's one every 10 feet or so, or 8 feet. And, they have to work around them, but nobody goes home with a nosebleed. Nobody goes home with a headache. Nobody goes home fatigued. Nobody goes home with a heart condition because you have this in your classroom instead. Too easy in this school. Too easy.
You ran everything up on the ceiling, then dropped it down on the poles.
Just
and
dropped
then
it down
the
the
other
pole.
classrooms, you had it running along the side where they could plug in. I mean, I'm in conversations with schools on this, and these are what we talk about. Like, how do you actually really do it? Like, we can talk about hardwiring, but you're showing us how it is done and functioning. So
this is how it's done
it's
if you want to do it. The school boards don't want to do it. So they're going to put up a roadblock. And one of those roadblocks is going to be, how do we do it? So that's just easy. That's just like saying, well, there's coffee on the list. Like, if they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. So, and it doesn't matter if you tell the principal, look, are you going to really be responsible for the death of a kid if it happens in your school? Well, we're going to get a lawyer to shut you up, son. That kind of stuff. They just don't want to do it. But if you want to do it, you can find a way,
Right.
So you have to go classroom by classroom, figure it out. And that's 2 simple, different ways. Now there's other classrooms that have the same thing. And in the younger grades, they just don't have it because they're not looking at a laptop. There's the LAN port by the teacher. They've got whiteboards or TV screens that the teacher can plug into to do a presentation if they want, like everybody's working with that technology now. So a lot of the classrooms will have a 45-inch TV screen, or some of them have whiteboards, but whiteboards are a little bit dated technology. So they're kind of, the school had them 10 years ago, but some of them are breaking down. So frankly, we're just replacing them with giant TV screen now. There it is, a Wi-Fi free school that's one of the most academically successful schools and in the county, and it works. And that's where I sent my kids. And I think it was just out of the drive of my wife and I to do it and get it done that we didn't really see any obstacle as a legitimate something that you couldn't get over, like a hurdle. I worked in the Middle East. I'd be in Jerusalem, and Hafiz al-Assad dies in Syria, and it was illegal for me as a resident of Jerusalem to be in Syria, but I got there in 12 hours and reported out of there. That was hard. This was not so hard. We could do it. You can do anything if you set your mind to it.
Yes.
If you really want to do it. And I was, before we did this, when we first moved to town, we moved into a townhouse complex, and they were spraying the lawns with lawn chemicals, and our daughter was just born learning to crawl. And we thought, oh my God, you can't be doing this, unnecessarily spraying lawn with chemicals. So we got the board of directors to agree to stop it. And there was one curmudgeonly old guy who didn't want to do it. So even though he agreed to it, he sent out a memo saying, I, as president of this condo corporation, will decide to spray the chemicals should I see fit, to preserve all of our property values. So we said, okay, we're going to have to go over and above this guy. And we started a campaign in the town to outlaw pesticides, not all pesticides, but basically cosmetic lawn pesticides for the whole town. And we did it. And we did it in about 6 months and got it done. So Then we did this, and I thought, what's the commonality to these things? It's really protecting the children from things that they can't protect themselves against.
Right.
I was not an activist. I've never been an activist. I'm a journalist. I haven't worked as a journalist in a long time, but when I did a lot of what I called the David and Goliath stories. Somebody would come and say, somebody's being harmed, somebody's being hurt, and this who's doing it, and they're doing it not out of the intention of harm, but it's a sidebar factor, and so I would do the story, and things would change. And when I found that when you're not working as a journalist, nobody pays attention to you. So you got to get the journalists interested. But I've noticed of late that journalism has been decimated as we knew it, even 10 years ago when these stories were done. The CBC up in Canada doesn't commit journalism that I've heard to the standard that I practice it on that network for a decade. The advertising dollars have gone out of it. In the case of the CBC, they laid off 130 people in the Media Guild about a year ago. And the newspapers are all but finished. They're hanging on by a thread. They're desperate to fill their pages. They haven't got anybody that can go and work on a story for a month. And, when you work on a story for a month, it's like a legal case. It has to be. And when you're working as a journalist, your last editor is always a lawyer. And this would be true of the New York Times, the CBC, CBS News, anybody. The last line of editor is the lawyer. So your stuff's solid. And after the lawyer sees it, it's called being lawyered. This story is, and what you would do is when you give a script to an announcer to announce, say on NBC News, at the top it says lawyered, right? So the guy doesn't go, you know what, I don't like that word, I'm going to change it. Not a comma changes after that. So it's at the highest level. Nobody's doing that anymore. They can't afford to do it, and on a pro forma regular basis. So when they can't, then there's no room for a young guy like me to and say, wow, I love what those guys are doing. I want to go and work on that show. I want to go and apprentice on that show. I want to go become that guy. That's over. So now we have the advent of Children's Health Defense, Environmental Health Trust, your organization, other organizations that are coming up and basically filling the void where journalism has failed. And it's not because the journalists are failed, it's because the system that they operate in has changed so dramatically and there's no funding to do what they do anymore. So,
well, let me say what we're also seeing is the advertising is so intense, like even the New York Times with what they're putting out about 5G being a Russian plot, say, that is thrown up at us when we raise the issue of wireless, even talking about wireless in school and children's health. People bring in these well-placed stories where if you take a look at the sources, they're all industry tied. And
yes, and the New York Times has famously been outed for having Verizon staff in their newsroom. And I can't remember the name of them because I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but there's one of their top science reporters wrote a load of malarkey about 5G. And I think he was the one that wrote about the Russian plot and all this. And they basically take the most wild scenarios and they mouth off about it. But this is my last slide in this. And I just wanted to point that these are facts, that this is happening to these children. And we can choose, to do nothing over here, stick our head in the sand. The present situation is the water line's about here, and big people like me don't get affected by it. But the water line for the little people is over their heads. And if that was a real water line, they'd be drowning. So what can you do? You can increase wireless radiation so the water line's higher and more people are drowning, or you can reduce it so that everybody's okay. You're not going to get rid of it, but you can reduce it.
So I have some questions, and these are really common. I'm glad to talk about it too, having been here right where with you. But people often bring up the statement saying something like, Wi-Fi radiation is very low. Let's talk about responding to that statement. I'm sure.
Well, compared to what? So compared to a cell phone, yeah, because the cell phone goes here and the Wi-Fi is over there somewhere, so it's lower. But in the schools, it's not the case. It is super high. If we went back to that video where I had the measuring device at the cell phone tower 300 meters away, the number values at the school were 7 times higher in my daughter's kindergarten class. So that wasn't low. And also there's a couple of factors. It's not always the intensity. There's really three factors as I understand
Right.
it. The intensity, the position, how close it is to you, the distance it is to you, and the length of duration. So if the Wi-Fi is on in your house 24/7, that's a long exposure. And if your cell phone's off and over there, I mean, it's resting, it's busy. I own one. But it's not on. And I don't put my phone here anymore. I keep it over here or out here where it's on speakerphone. So you can choose to minimize it, but also we can't, there's no one size fits all, right? Everyone didn't die in the Simcoe County District School Board. 2 kids did. Everyone didn't get cardiac arrest and have a device implanted in their heart. 2 other kids did. Everyone didn't get erratic tachycardia requiring a heart monitor, confounding their cardiologist in our kids' school. Only 7. So it happens to some and not the others. So we have to create an environment that's safe for these kids. That's why we don't exhaust our cars in the parking lot. That's why we don't have lead toxicity forced upon them.
So, and there are many other endpoints other than heart issues. So heart issues can be very acute, immediate, and that is what tends to wake people up more than those longer term effects, which can happen from the repeated low level exposure of any environmental exposure. But this issue of the pulse is so important because when you measure, the way governments measure wireless radiation is they average. So when you average a number, although in your measurements, as you showed, they were super high, which is whenever you're exceeding government limits, that is very high because the government limits are already sky high compared to what is safe. But Wi-Fi is a very erratic signal. And scientists talk about it is the erratic signal itself can be a part of a characteristic of an exposure that can make it more bioactive than a signal that is not as erratic. And we have online Dr. Hugh Scully's testimony to the City of Toronto. Are you familiar with that? He's the past president of the Ontario.
I'm familiar with Hugh, yes.
And he wrote a letter, which we have available. I'm going to put it in the chat.
I believe it was the Royal Society of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada, right? That was his past presidency?
Yeah, past president of the Canadian Cardiovascular Society and the past president of the Canadian Medical Association. And he talks about, as a cardiac specialist, I'm concerned that approximately 20% of people have detrimental cardiac rhythm sensitivity to electromagnetic radiation. There is an abundance of evidence from around the world that EMR can be harmful to health. Many countries, not Canada nor the United States, have initiated policies to mitigate risks. And he asked that the City of Toronto not install Wi-Fi in public parks and spaces. And I'm going to put that in the chat as well so that people have a link to that.
You know, when there was, I don't know if it was at the same time that Dr. Scully made that testimony, but there was another doctor named, Anthony, I can't think of his last name.
Tony Miller?
Yes,
Yeah.
Anthony Miller, thank you. Dr. Anthony Miller, top guy, professor at University of Toronto. He sat on the advisory committee to the International Association of Research on Cancer, on determining the classification to class 2B possible carcinogen. Top world guy. You would think, wow, we got that guy in Toronto. He testified to a committee at the City of Toronto. And there was this city councillor named Gord Perks. And he says, oh, are you talking about x-rays or are you talking about non-x? Are you talking about ionizing or non-ionizing? He goes, well, this is non-ionizing radiation. Oh, well, that's not a problem. And I thought, well, you know, in what medical school did you learn that, Mr. Perks? Like maybe he graduated from environmental studies or got a degree in English. I don't know quite what he did, but it was just an embarrassment to see that guy trying to school one of the top world experts with something he knows clearly nothing about. And the irony is he felt no embarrassment to the shame we all felt on his behalf for appearing to be such an idiot. And these are the type, and I don't particularly zone in on that guy because the school board, he's an elected official. The school board in Simcoe County, the elected officials behave, one of them in particular, our trustee, behaved similarly offensively. And came to the town of Collingwood where we thought, okay, you're not going to take it out of the school. We got a brand new library and they got all the Wi-Fi in the children's section. Let's get them to take it out of there. And the mayor was on side and he introduced a motion to examine it. And the school trustee, who doesn't even live in our town, came to make a deputation and lied to the council when she was asked by one of the counselors. It was a setup. Clearly, they didn't go to acting school. The counselor leans forward and says, and what have you done about all the complaints, the health complaints at the school? And she leans forward stiffly and says, there have been none, and sits back. And I got to speak afterwards. And I said, wow, she just lied. And as a journalist, I know you're not supposed to say that unless you can prove it to be true. All the emails that I had sent her, all the meetings she had been in, it was easily provable. And that's how they behave. And then the guy, the superintendent, who's the paid staff, swinging his back to all those kids, crying for help, those mothers begging for mercy.
Yeah.
And he turns his back with his foot on their throat and a smile on his face.
Well, this story is being repeated over and over again, where parents are advocating for safer technology in schools. I mean, that was over a decade ago now, right? So, or about, because I know you started in around 2010. Am I right?
Yes.
So someone, and that's been repeated. I've been in that story. We have offered to pay for full, hardwiring school when my kids were younger in another school. And they said, no, we were going to do everything. So I have a question, but I have a quick question before that question. Could you talk about how much it costs to install these systems in a classroom? At the time, we got it from a person who just does wiring. It's very simple. People know how to do it. They've been doing it for years. It's called low voltage wiring. The estimate that we had for a small private school, I think it was about 6 classrooms, was a couple $1,000s. I think it was no more than $4,000 to do the whole thing.
Yeah, around that, depending on how many classrooms you're going to do. Yeah, around that. I mean, parents who care would easily raise that among them.
Right.
So yeah, it was about that. I think, we did a real super nice job. And initially it wasn't as nice as it looked in those pictures I showed you today.
Right.
It was just a bunch of cables on the floor. And then we tried to deal with it for a while. And eventually parents in the school came up with the money to say, okay, we're committed to this. Let's clean it up now. Let's invest and get somebody to come in. Back when we were just going to do it at the elementary school, the public school, one of the parents who worked in that industry said, I'll do it. I'll send my crew over here. In fact, he said, he knew the roadblocks they were going to give. We can't let you in the school. He says, well, actually, I have contracts with the school board. So all of my staff are pre-approved to go in the school. And we can just go in on a Saturday and get it done in 4 hours. And no. The only way you're going to get this done is you got to outnumber the people. You may have to do it during an election year and let the school trustee in Canada certainly is like the lowest common denominator of election. It's some, people who are either retired from a job and they want to give back to the community and they really don't want controversy, or somebody trying to, see if they want to be a career politician, move up to city council, move up to provincial, move up to federal. We've seen that. None of them were interested in really wrapping their heads around this. So we didn't try to baffle them with science. We just showed them, here's what's happening. What are you going to do about it? The answer? Nothing. So I got into a private school, and it was a pretty cheap private school. And I just did a little math here, and we probably spent $250,000 out of our personal after-tax money sending our kids to that school. And that was a little bit at a time, month by month, keeping them there, working hard, deciding that that's where we were going to put our money instead of something else. And imagine if, 10, 12 years later, I had $250,000 to invest. Wouldn't that be nice? But we don't. But we have kids who don't have headaches. And, once you put them out into the world, though, at university, I don't know how you stop that one in the dorm.
I'm working on that now a little bit.
Yeah, but it's tough. And
Yeah.
if so, the strategy, I'm not a great political strategist, and a friend of mine who is, and is a politician in Canada and a noted one, told me early on, he goes, "You're not going to win this because you're right. You're only going to win this because you get enough people to lobby the politicians to make change,
Right.
because they're afraid to lose their job." That's the way. And Simcoe County has a geographical diameter of 50, 60 miles and in all directions. And we're not neighbors with all those people. So it's tough. We started doing it. We got somewhere, but at some point you got to go to sleep and you got to live your life and you got to make money and and they know at the school board that eventually your kids will graduate. If they hold you off long enough, you'll leave. And that's how they roll. And they see us coming. And when we sat through the evening that we presented to the school board, you got to sit through a lot of their regular business. They deliberated more on whether to change what time the bell rings in the morning from 8:45 to 8:50 than they did on this. This is about what they're capable of at that level. And I don't besmirch their abilities. I mean, they don't have to be medical officers of health, masters of public health, scientists, but they should talk to a couple of them like we did. I'm not any of those things either. I just know who we qualify as experts and what qualifies as science. And at the beginning of the scientific study that you're holding in front of me, if it says the guy works for Motorola, chuck it.
Right. So tell me, people are asking, given the politics of education, where do we start if we want to get Wi-Fi removed from a school? Do we start with the principals or the superintendents?
You're talking to somebody who failed, so I'll put that disclaimer right at the top. But I succeeded, right? I got my little corner of the world, right?
Yeah.
Here's something that we realized. So in the school board document, they had a policy on internet connectivity. And they got all kinds of positive language for this. The latest one for 5G is called cell gap repair. So there's a gap in the cells, we got to fix that, right? That's their 5G language. So the language back then had footnotes. And one of the footnotes simply said Cisco, CYSCO, is a maker of Wi-Fi devices, page 32, whatever the page number was. And I thought, well, that's a really crappy footnote for an academic, an educator. So we went online and we took the language and we put the whole language into the Google search engine. And we came up not only with the document from Cisco, which was, the 21st Century Learner, it was called the 21st Century Learner. And this language was being used. So also, coincidentally, up came hundreds of school boards, county by county, across the US and Canada, who had this exact language in their policies. So the policy was not organic, written by the school boards. The policy was written by the company that was going to profit by selling the devices to the school.
Right.
So if you want to make a change, I don't know how you do it. You got to basically get the people to say, the moms to say, we don't want this, but you have to have a critical mass of them. And then you just have to keep making noise until they do what you want to do. And often it's on the QT. Like I've got one friend that got the teachers. She had a kid so sensitive. She got the teachers who were on side going, look, we don't want it either, right? But we're going to lose our jobs. And they wouldn't be above, they might not fire you because the unions are really strong in Canada for teachers, strongest that we have, but they can reassign you. Remember I said the school district was about 50 miles? They can make you travel. They can say, you know what, we need your expertise way over here. Mm-hmm. You live way over here. So we just added a 2.5-hour commute to your life. So she actually got the teachers to put pie plates on top of the things and tape them there. And then the signal was stopped. So there's a thing.
Less direct.
Put a pie plate on there. Stop it. That's one thing. Find start a school. I mean, these are not easy solutions. You're trying to you're trying to stop a machine that is global. They're launching satellites into space to make more wireless. I'm just a guy, I'm just a guy trying to protect his kids. And I found a school that God put across the street from my house that was in financial trouble, that wanted my kids. If I'd have said, can I paint the school pink? I'll put my kids in. They would have go, you supply the paint. We're good with that. So it didn't really matter as long as my request wasn't hurting anybody. We didn't know that. We thought they were the most bloody enlightened people we'd ever met. But I knew that they did have concern for children's health because they consulted me, because I was the pesticide mouth off when around the time the school was being built. So they consulted me about how to keep environmental toxins out of a new building at the time it was being built. So I knew that they had foresight and they were concerned about children's health in a learning environment. So I knew they'd be receptive to it, and they were. And it was an easy fix because the whole school had been built with hardwired connections. But you can change it. It can be done. Don't take excuses for why they can't. Can't is a 4-letter word, and it shouldn't be said. It shouldn't be taught to children.
I completely agree. There is anything is possible. I mean, whenever anyone has told me, oh, we can't do that, it's too hard, obviously you've done it. So it is possible. And yeah, I think that the majority of the changes are pretty easy. There might be about 20% where you actually have to do a little extra work. You actually have to plug that Ethernet in, or you have to remember where that adapter is. Find that adapter, use that adapter, or maybe you have to move your seat a bit. But what are we comparing here? We're talking about heart attacks and cancer and all kinds of other effects.
Sure, unlikely, but potentially. You're talking about daily unexplained headaches that kids are just going to medicate for. You're talking about fatigue, lack of concentration. What good is that in a school environment,
Right. And, there are a lot of, so I'm sure you know this, but for everyone on the call as well, there are many, especially kindergartens in Belgium, Cyprus, France, Israel, where they have made sure that there is no Wi-Fi by law. French Polynesia as well. In Cyprus, they removed Wi-Fi from the Archbishop Macarius Hospital in the neonatal and the pediatric units. There are many actions happening around the world on this, and it really is just a matter of time. So the way I see it is, what side of history do you want to be on? Well, I mean, when the kids say, I remember when I was talking about this with a parent once, and the little kid was at the mom's feet. You know how the kids are always hanging on to the mom at the legs when you're trying to talk to another mom or dad. And she looks up and she says, she says, well, why don't you just get a safe one? We were talking about phones. It's like, we just need to choose the safe one. None of this, we don't even need to have the conversation. Just choose the safe one. We do it in our lives all the time. We practice choosing the safe thing all the time. It's like what parents do. We don't go, oh, let me check if it's proven, if there's hundreds of scientists saying there's a problem, right? I mean, at what point? So I also wanted to, I put in the chat a link to action steps that parents can take. I do believe that if you organize and have, Rodney, as you said, a lot of parents, which is the trick of the trade, right? You can make a difference in your community, and you have to have it sustained, a sustained, vocal, very public work.
What I would start with would be a health questionnaire. That's how we grew really fast. We actually paid for radio ads to play on the local stations. So we when we first met Dr. Magda Havis, who's the guru of so much of this, she agreed to come and speak publicly. So we got a local hall, and we put out radio ads, and we simply, read by the announcer at the radio station, so they sounded professional, but we wrote the scripts. And they said, is your child experiencing headaches at school? Are they tired when they come home? Do they feel better on the weekends? We started listing just to make the ears perk up of the parents. I said, come and hear this lecture and find out why the school may be causing the problem. And that room was packed. And we had women coming up to the microphone crying. My son passes out in school. He banged his head on the way down. He's got a concussion. Almost always it was the kids who maybe were a little bit on the autism spectrum, maybe had some learning disability or some physical disability, they were more sensitive. Their radar's a little, you know, how autistic kids, a lot of them, they don't like wearing tight clothing, right? They would loose clothing. You see them, adults now, the autism world is now in adult age, and you'll see them walking down the street in loose clothing, right? And they're hypersensitive on their skin, right? And they're hypersensitive to the waves as well. You saw that kid, Austin Lamondon, at the beginning of the video. He started doing this, right? Isn't that interesting that he did this? This is a pulsed wave on the guy's head. So they're feeling it more than others. And these are the kids, if we can't protect the weakest in our society, then we can't protect ourselves. We have to look out for the weakest, and particularly in school. And we don't know who they are yet because they're just young. Their bodies are forming. And I think that now that there is a movement, and you named all the countries, and I doubt that these are national programs, but rather smaller, like within regions or within cities or small towns. The smaller the town you're in, the bigger the chance you have to affect change. We're seeing that with, I build infrared saunas. That's what we do. And we build them for fire departments. And the smaller the town, they'll come and they'll buy, because the firefighters are getting sick and they like to sweat and get the toxins out of the sweat. The smallest towns will buy them like that. The medium-sized towns, maybe. And then the bigger cities, they're, oh, it's going to take forever. So if you're in a smaller town, you got a way better shot at it. But I think that in your arsenal would be a list of all the schools that have done it, showing number one, that it's necessary, number two, that it's possible. And then possibly try to lay the level of responsibility at the foot of the decision maker. Now, the problem you're going to get with teachers and principals is they're terrified for their job. They don't want to lose their job. They went to school for a long time to be a teacher. Many of them love their job like nothing else. They just love being in a classroom, and they don't want to rock the boat. And like, it's really easy to punish these people, and they will. I mean, they're bloody ruthless at the school board. Turn their backs on a child, saying, "Please help me."
We've had teachers in the United States, for those of you who've been working on this for a long time, in Rhode Island. Rodney, I don't know if you remember the Rhode Island teacher that was actually lost her job. There was a very public.
I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, they did a technicality related to testing, but had raised all of this in the context of the Wi-Fi that was making her sick. I was thankful that we actually were able to get a video of the hearing, the sort of hearing that happened, and we made it public. It became a big thing several years ago. It's got to be like 7 years ago.
Yeah.
But they got her on a technicality, and
sure, they'll do that.
It was like a hound dog. They were after her like it was just. So sad.
It's a playbook.
Yeah.
Move. And they think, okay, if we can't fire you for freedom of speech rules or speaking out on behalf of the health of children, then we'll find another way. And beware, because they will.
So in the United States, some groups that are taking action are the PTAs. And
awesome.
Yes, it is in pockets. But for example, the United Educators of San Francisco passed a resolution on safe technology. They wanted the California Department of Health recommendations on cell phones to be dispersed to all the kids. The New York Teachers Union, New York State Teachers Union had a resolution on the hazards of wireless radiation. But
the teachers unions have done that in Ontario as well.
Yes, they have.
Well, and then we publicize it on their behalf. And one of them, the Ontario Catholic Teachers Association, he stood right by it. When we put up the news release, the journalists came, they all came and they talked to him and they put him on a radio phone in nationally, and he stood up for it. And he just said, listen, this is caution. I haven't got all the lockdown science on this, but there's enough science to say, don't expose the members of my union to this without consent. Consent is a big issue. I don't consent. Right. And I think the greatest weapon that we still have is the World Health Organization list of possible carcinogens. And when they tell you that there's pickles in coffee on it, ask them how much they expose a kindergarten child to those pickles and that coffee without consent of their parents 6 hours a day. They don't. The list is there for us to recognize upcoming emerging things that we should pay attention to. And in particular, those tiny little bodies that are getting exposed to the same amount. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'2", over 200 pounds. I'm not terribly sensitive to this stuff, but my daughter was 4 years old, getting exposed to what the tech guy in our schools called the Lamborghini of Wi-Fi transmitters on a daily basis without our knowledge or consent. So consent is an issue. Prudent avoidance is good language. This is language that public health officials use. It's prudent to avoid something that is potentially harmful. And once it's on that list, like that's the list that unions use to say, don't expose me to that. So for example, if a cleaning supply is on that list, the union will say, you can't, you as an employer can't purchase that cleaner for my overnight, cleaner to come in an office or a school or wherever to use, because we, the union, deem that to be potentially harmful. You must find a substitute that is safer. And that's the language that they tend to use, is find a substitute, and one exists, hardwiring the computer, that is potentially safer. And if they say it costs money, we'll say, well, then if you're going to use that as an excuse, we need a cost analysis for the lifetime of these people for when potentially they can't have children when they're 35. Do that cost analysis.
I know. We've been wanting to see a really good breakdown on cost analysis that gets published. Actually, they've done it for lead poisoning, and it's absolutely financially worthwhile to fix it now. And to
it has to be worthwhile as a society to stop making sitting in a school a physical, daunting task for a child. It has to be worthwhile for our society to make education the funnest, most amazing experience it can possibly be, so they love to learn. Otherwise, what happens in 10 years?
Right. Right. Well, I have just a few questions. I know we're way over time, but do you think that, Sharon asked, do you think the school officials are refusing to protect children because they might be being paid or being rewarded to use Wi-Fi? Is there anything in it for them?
I don't know the answer to this, but I had a suspicion at the time. So the trustees, I think, where we live, they weren't necessarily the most educated pack as a group. The superintendents, I have two cousins who are school teachers, and we're right at the end of their career when this thing emerged. And they were in town, and we were going out for dinner with them, and they said, we're going to meet after this dinner with the school superintendent and tell him about Wi-Fi. And he didn't know the guy. And he'd been a lifetime in teaching, has a master's in education. And he said, school superintendent. So this guy, after he finished university with his English degree, still didn't know what he wanted to do. So he went to teachers college. And after that, he wasn't really into it, but he took the job because it paid well. He wasn't a very good teacher, so they made him a vice principal. And he wasn't a very good vice principal, so they made him a principal. And he does whatever he's told. So eventually he'll be the superintendent, and he doesn't care about you. And I went, well, you cynic, please stop talking about that man the way bang on true about this guy. So then we started looking at these Cisco type companies, and they had some technical association, and they put on conferences, and they would fly in the superintendents. And so I don't know anything more than that, but I predict that these people felt special and were being wined and dined by professionals in business who know how to gain business. And I call it business American style, the greatest country for business on the planet. And me as a little Canadian went down to do business with an American company, and the president comes down and all the engineers are there, and we go out for a big lunch, and I was a rock star because they wanted my business, which was this big. This is how big business rolls. And you get a guy who's come up through the education system, and he gets a taste of that, and boy, might he feel special. So I think if there is any corruption like that, it's simple, cheap, and easy to do. And it might be as simple as making him think that he's going to get a promotion because he's a hero. So in my province, they have a little special thing called the Sunshine List, which was invented by a conservative premier, I'm going to say 25 years ago. And at the time, more than that, 30 years ago. At the time, it was any public employee who earned more than $100,000 had their name, their job title, where they worked, and their salary published annually. And $100,000 ain't a lot of change in 2021, but that's still the marker. So they're all on it, right? So back when, a high salary might have been 80,000, which the superintendents are now making 180. But we found out that the superintendents were making around 180. And the next step was the director of education, the top person. That's $350,000 a year. So what can I do to get up there? There's a big incentive. It's not a corrupt incentive, but it's a legitimate incentive to give people a drive to try to reach it. And certainly something was making them say, I'm not going to listen anymore. I don't want to know the information that you're giving me, that these 12-year-old children can't go to school because they're so sick. I don't want to hear it. So whoever asked that question, their gut is probably right. But my brain hasn't been able to connect those dots. It wasn't a dot that I had to connect. Like, you can go into the level of journalism where you start going, okay, I could probably prove that. I could probably find out. I could probably start doing freedom of information requests, but I got stuff to do. In the end, I just went with, okay, the truth is not making anybody do the right thing. So I got to shift gears and find the school that's going to be safe for my kids. And then I can do other stuff now.
Well, I'll say that what's happening in the United States style, is we are having our superintendents and head of IT in our education departments being flown places, going to fancy conferences. Some of them even get a certain amount of money for however many whatevers they do that then goes back into their budget. In fact, we have top administrators who've ended up retiring or for whatever reason, and then they go work for the education companies.
For sure. So there's probably a pre-incentive. Get this done and there might be a job for you. Probably, I say, because I really don't know. But that's not uncommon.
Happening here.
Right? There was a mayor of my little town in the past that was surplusing all kinds of land, really, really racing before his last day in the office. And then he went and worked for a building development company afterwards as a municipal consultant. So, he did a couple of favors and then he got a job, and that's how the world works. And, get with the program, wake up and smell your world. But when we're harming children, can we please put our own pot of gold aside for a minute and let the children get the same chances we did to a healthy life? Bill Gates and Steve Jobs didn't grow up with Wi-Fi in their schools, but they invented some of the greatest things that we have on Earth.
Right. And they don't give their kids cell phones when they're young either. They minimize the technology. Steve Jobs and
that Montessori down in Cupertino, no Wi-Fi in the school, all the top guys. Yeah. So we should do as they do, not as they sell.
Yeah. So just real briefly, Dr. Deborah Davis and several other scientists from Environmental Health Trust we have a letter related to Wi-Fi in school that we've been getting out to PTAs and school boards. And people are sending us the name, the emails. So when this got sent out, we got contacted by the Central Okanagan School District.
In British Columbia, yep.
Yes. And asked if we wanted to present. Yes, we did. But then when the school board was presented with the question is, should we present via I don't know if they're a trustee or what they're called, but the school board voted no. They didn't want to hear from Dr. Davis. They didn't want to hear from the scientists, and they had all sorts of absolutely wrong.
Somebody got to them between the initial request and that.
Yeah,
I saw the same thing at it's called the Pine Ridge District School Board in Kawartha, which coincidentally is where Magda Havas was a professor. So I was on the presentation list to describe what happened in my school because they were about to decide whether to put Wi-Fi in or not, whether to budget it. And Magda showed up. Now, Magda, she has been flown around this planet 16 times over to lecture to professors, to medical doctors, to scientists, to governments, to be an expert witness at trials. There's no doubting this person's credentials. And they stopped the meeting because a motion was put forward that Dr. Havas had presented to the school board sometime within the past 24 months. Therefore, by the rules, she was not allowed to present again. And they put a motion right before our eyes. And I said, I was sitting next to her. I said, Magda, what's happening? She said, they're not going to let me talk. And they voted, and the vote went her way, and she was allowed to speak. But I saw that effort being made. And I just don't get it, where you play that video of those kids, a small sampling, and their moms, and you say, I don't care. That's what they're saying. I don't care. Your child is too sick to go to school because of something unnecessary that we put in your school. I don't care. They're not saying you're wrong. They're saying, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't care. So this is the problem that needs to be overcome. And you can maybe use your local press if there is one. Do a little bit of digging, find out where they're getting money, send it to the press, ask them to confirm it. You put out, what we did was we started the Simcoe County Safe School Association. Name we made up. Got a website, got a GoDaddy. This whole thing took an hour. And then we got an account with something called Canadian Newswire. I think it's called PR Web. There's one in the US that you can do. You give them, back then it was $120. Now it's over 1,000. So it's a little tougher to do, but we would put out a news release, and the news release would say something that was shocking, true, and verifiable. And they would come and they would do the story. So if you put out a news release saying this person received this amount of money to do this thing and has done this instead of listening to all the science that is harming children, the parents are calling for the resignation. Maybe that's a story. Maybe that's something they'll follow up on. You got to keep trying.
Yeah, I think having a group, naming a group, putting out press releases and staying on it is the way to get action. The challenge is that right now we have so many things that it's hard to know, we're only one person with so many time in the day, and supposedly we have to take a shower, make dinner, cook, clean, and do all these other things at the same time that we are, engaged in this. And it's quite challenging, but there really can be success. And I really think it's important to point to the success stories, because people don't seem to move by the science. I find our elected officials, they're moved by a lot of people, but also they want to know that it's been done before. It is possible. Things are
That's critical, because when they do anything, they say, who else has done it? This is a standard pro forma in politics. Right. So you show them, here's who's done it.
It's done it.
The closer you can get, the better.
Right.
In our case, it was a little private school, but there is a public school board in British Columbia, the North Saanich Public School District. Again, very small little one. They maybe have 2-3 elementary schools that banned Wi-Fi from their elementary schools, but allowed it in the high school. So that's a start, right? High school, it's worse, I think, because they're going through puberty. You don't know what's happening to your body. You'll get a lightheaded headache. It might be something else, but it all exacerbates. And plus, they all got a cell phone on, and then they got the Wi-Fi on. I remember I was asked to go in the high school and talk about something. I think it was I was asked to go in the media class because I worked as a TV journalist for years, and talk to them about video production. And one of the teachers said, listen, I've heard about the Wi-Fi, can you tell me about that? So we're standing right under a transformer at the time. I start getting a dry mouth. I said, some of the symptoms, dry mouth, headache, lack of concentration, let's step out into the fresh air. Doesn't that feel better? Well, maybe we just think we needed some fresh air. You don't necessarily know where it's coming from, but you've got to identify that people have identified it for you. Other school boards have done it for you. And, I would encourage the people who have the smaller districts, the smaller schools, the smaller towns, because I think this is the same reason that the AstraZeneca vaccine was kicked out of Iceland, Denmark, and Finland first, because these are small countries where the prime minister might bump into you on the street and get recognized. This is my feeling. And the bigger countries have a harder time, being really directly responsible to the people. You take a place with a population of 7 million, you're going to recognize somebody. So the smaller the town in terms of organization, the greater your potential win.
In our school system, Montgomery County is one of the largest school systems on the East Coast. But there are parents who have effectively advocated to have their kid be on a wire in the classroom. Now, they haven't been able to get the Wi-Fi turned off, but they have been able to get that wire. Once they went up to the administration level, it all broke down, because then from the top, they said, oh, no, you can't do that. We're not allowing that. Even though in the school itself, they were able to advocate to the principal, hey, can I do this? Can I just plug my kid in? The principal said yes. The teacher said fine. I have met with principals in the Montgomery County school system. Parents have brought me in to sit down with principals of very important schools, I will say. And that principal actually came up with some ideas, such as, let's have the kids sit not directly under the router. I'll make sure that we do it this way. She came up with ideas the best she could do, but she couldn't go past the administration where they were saying, these have to be on all the time. But yet those kids were moved to the other side of the room. Unfortunately, that doesn't provide protection from Wi-Fi.
I've heard this lots of times. When we were doing it, there was a mother who went into the school to try to figure out why her kid was having the headaches. She heard the stuff that we were talking about with the Wi-Fi. She found out that the Wi-Fi transmitter was right above her kid's head, and he just basically blacked out. So she said to the teacher, can we sit him at the back of the class? Now, who asked for the kid to go to the back, right? Usually to the front. So sit him at the back of the class, and he was doing fine. Comes home sick again. What happened? Teacher said, I'm not allowed to sit at the back of the class. Mother goes in. Teacher said, I got an order from my principal, who's had an order from the school board.
That's right.
That we're not allowed to make any accommodation based on Wi-Fi. So this kid got to sit home and not go to school.
That was because they were worried about the liability issue from acknowledging that there might be any health implications, because we're at a point now where schools are liable if they've been informed. That's why we really recommend that everyone actually send everything you have to all the decision makers, so that they can't say that they haven't seen it.
One of the things that I would suggest to people, and these are some places that we considered going, but then it just got to the point where we thought, what does it matter anymore? They're not going to do it. Find out so all of the, both the trustees and the superintendents will have a blanket personal liability insurance by the school board. And we know that there's these issues about Lloyd's of London not underwriting the phones. We've heard these things. Find out, and they might not tell you, so you might have to go through like an access to public information form. Find out who the insurer is, write the insurer, explain, send them and send them a whole package. There's nothing more conservative or fearful than an insurance company. And write what you think the potential liability is going to be, and ask them simply how they have budgeted to pay for a potential class action lawsuit against the decision makers who are willfully and knowingly putting children in harm's way for the entirety of their public school education. What contingency does the insurance company have? Wouldn't it be a shame if they pulled the insurance and said, we're not insuring you anymore? Insurance companies are super skittish right now. And like, for example, I build saunas, and I was told, sorry, we're not insuring saunas anymore. I've been insuring my company for 20 years. We had to go find special risk insurance because stuff is changing now. And they're getting a lot more skittish about a lot of things. So dump it on the insurers. That's a strategy.
Sharon says, but the director's insurance protects only so long as the person is acting in good faith. If this person is ignoring evidence, would they be acting in good faith?
Report them to the insurer and ask for an opinion. Now, the insurer will say, we can't give you any opinion because you're not our client. And
Right, that happened to
you
me.
could say, I'm about to launch on your client and we're going to name your company. See if you get anything, or see if you can get the policy. There was all kinds of stuff we got through access to information. The first thing they made us do when we asked them, okay, we've got every parent who's complaining of a sick kid saying it's 18 months. We didn't know most of these people and they were all saying 18 months. So we want to know when the Wi-Fi went in. They wouldn't tell us. So we had to go to access to information to find out. And I thought, boy, what happened? And I told this to the lady who was giving it to me. I said, I hope another kid doesn't die during the period while you're delaying giving us the information. A kid that we could have saved. Now, granted, there was 2 funerals here. I wasn't making stuff up, right? And there was 2 surgeries on hearts of children. Magda helped me to do the research on pediatric cardiac arrest. And we had exceeded the expected, it happens, right? The expected occurrence was exceeded by 50-fold in Simcoe County schools. And that was one of the things I reported to the Royal Society. And I just told them right to their face. I said, you're delaying this. You have a choice. You might say it's your job, but at heaven's door, they don't ask you where you worked. They might ask you if you harm children, though.
In California, there have been several teachers and several different lawsuits. We have, for example, going back, I think it was 212 to 214, where a teacher who was having cardiac issues got accommodation to where she could be in a Wi-Fi free classroom. And she testified online, at a school board meeting about this. And actually, I'm going to splice that in when I edit this to show that testimony. But there are also teachers who are asking for accommodations with medically documented injuries where they're not getting accommodations. And let me back up and say one thing. The LA school district has a allowable, they state, they have an allowable level of radio frequency radiation, which is 10,000 times less than FCC limits to protect kids. That's a whole other story because we don't believe they're adequately following that.
No, they're probably not testing it at the point of contact with the computer where they found that 35%, 34% higher than the limits.
And they're averaging, and there's all kinds of things related to that. But they actually have a document that says to protect kids, we're going 10,000 times less than FCC limits, just to show how outrageous our FCC and Canada limits are. But just recently, it's Brown versus LAUSD. They just won an appeal because they were, the other side was trying to throw out the case. And they just won the appeal so that they could then have their case be tried. And that is where the teacher is alleging that she has electromagnetic hypersensitivity and she hasn't been provided the accommodations and so forth. So she's going to be able to move forward with her case. Industry has such deep pockets. They just keep pushing all of this away. I don't know if you know that Dr. Chris Portier in the United States, a former director with the CDC, and he submitted an over 100-page report on radio frequency radiation, determining that there's a high probability that it causes brain tumors. In a case which has been winding through the courts for over a decade now, where there are people, most of them dead, who are alleging that the tumors that they have are related to the cell phone to the head. And industry is now trying to have his testimony stricken and not even allowing him to testify in the case.
The obfuscation of truth is extraordinary.
Yeah.
The willful attempt to pull the wool over our, and for what? Is it just faster internet? Mine's pretty fast. Is it just so we can get more Facebook, get on Instagram? I don't know what the motivation is, but probably money, you know. How should it be in Wi-Fi in schools that for the convenience of hooking up without a wire, we poison the majority of the students? How can it be? Our system is broken when that has occurred, particularly where the school district I was in and all the ones who are listening today and all the ones, I mean, these countries across the world you mentioned, none of that happened without a process. So the system is broken. The system is captured without a doubt, much like our regulatory arms. Health Canada is completely captured. The FCC is the evidence that it's captured with the revolving door of industry, health regulator, industry, FCC regulator, back to industry association spokesperson. This is how it works. So really you're looking at a grassroots movement that has to be extremely local and targeted very locally. Don't bite off more than you can chew. If whoever's saying no to you had to face you every day, it might get tired of it and just buckle. If there was people picketing their house, they might not like it. If they were picketing the school board every time that guy walked in the door, out the door, every day.
Yeah.
Things like this. I don't know what else to do. I'm not a community organizer. Like I say, journalists are calling the story from the bleachers of the game. And when I left journalism, I started playing on the field. And it's tough down here. It's not as easy as calling it from the bleachers. It's hard work, and you got to be thoughtful, and it's personality driven. And I was too much of a bulldog. A lot of people thought, oh, that guy's, we don't like him. He's too tough. He's too mouthy. We have to be pleasant. So I thought, how long can I keep a smile on my face on your behalf while they're strangling the children? It is not my personality. And in fact, a lot of times when I get involved in these things, I say, boy, you'd be a good person to talk about this because I'm going to make people angry. When I was a journalist, I used to be able to put stories out and change what happened pretty swiftly. Normally because all the other journalists would go, hey, that's a good story. How come I didn't get it? And then put it on. And now everybody's talking about it. And next thing you know, changed. And it almost happened this time. It almost happened. You know, we had the CBC came down and did a documentary on the national news in my little Mountain View school and interviewed all those kids. Global News, another national network here, did an investigative documentary. We had a lot of traction on it, but they knew they just had to wait.
Right.
And the noisy guy would go away and the other people would think that those headaches were treatable with an aspirin, and you know, maybe their kid doesn't like to go to school on Fridays, and that's all right too. And you know, the halls can fill up with anxiety-ridden kids who are waiting 2 weeks to see the counselor. The principal can have bowls of aspirin and Advil and Tylenol outside the door. Just say, take a pill. I'm busy. I'm on the phone here. This all becomes normal. It's the new normal.
Right.
It's the world we live in. Except at Pretty River Academy in Collingwood, Ontario, where they don't have Wi-Fi. It's a beautiful place. It's what a school can be, with happy children who don't have anxiety caused by an invisible agent that is unnecessary.
Thank you so much, Rodney.
Thank you for giving it the time today. It's always extraordinary when somebody cares enough to delve into it like you have.
Oh, I'm so thankful. I'm honored, especially to see the images. I am glad to share those around the world and to keep pushing and showing that it's possible. And I also, if you can send me links to those reports that you're talking about, the investigations with CBC and so forth. I mean, I have the cell phones one, but I'd love to link to that when we put this up so people can see all of this work, because a lot of people are coming in new, and it's so important to see the decades of work that's happened. I mean, there are scientists who've been working for decades, right? They've been working on this for decades.
Can we just name one of them for a minute? Dr. Deborah Lee Davis. Okay. So we wouldn't have gotten where we were without her book, Disconnect, which is the beautiful double entendre about what disconnected the science from the doctors, but also the notion is disconnect from your wireless. And that book is over 10 years old now. And I read it and I thought, wow, this is a pile of research. And I looked at her credentials. I mean, oh my gosh. And she has been relentless and indefatigable in her pursuit of truth and telling people what's going, and unlike me, unflappable when challenged, because she's not thinking about her baby girl, right? She's thinking about her grandkids, and she's thinking about doing the right thing because that's how she's wired. And Deborah came up to Toronto and spoke at a health conference that my wife and I sponsored this little portion of it. And Dr. Stephen Sinatra came as well, the cardiologist, and Dr. Magda Havis, the environmental toxicologist from Canada. And they all educated, you know, it was the biggest attended lecture at that conference. And that Deborah was willing to come and travel and get on a plane and do that stuff was extraordinary to me. And I will forever be grateful to her and to the Environmental Health Trust.
Wow, thank you so much. I will pass that on.
Thanks.
So thank you so much, Rodney. I look forward to sharing this, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Theodora. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.